line, right? If you think about it, going from A to B, like just think about yourself. A is you where you are right now, and B is where you want to be. Maybe B is your dream. Maybe B is you getting married or being successful in your business, in your career, being successful in your ministry. But oftentimes, that's not the case, right? That's God does not take us from A to B in the shortest route. He does take us in what we call detour. No? That's why we're gonna learn that. So in business straight line, there's a deviation from a direct course of action. That's why there's a detour. And who among you can relate to that? That I feel like in ani akong life karon, it's like a zigzag, no? It's not going direct to from A to B. And I believe that a God-designed detour is not purpose for delay, but for development. Can you say that with me, even though you are muted? No. Can we say that one more time? 1, 2, 3, go. A God-designed detour is not purpose for delay, but for development. And in the life of Joseph, God is more, he's more concerned with the dreamer rather than the dream. And oftentimes we're more concerned of the dream, but in God's perspective, He's more concerned with the dreamer rather than the dream. So He wants to develop the dreamer before He would be able to fulfill the dream. So we're gonna really look into the life of Joseph, and this afternoon we're gonna look into his family. And for you to understand a character, you have to really go back to where he came from. No, pag gusto mong you wanna know asa gikan ang bunga ato ka sa puno, right? No, so that's really the case. Joseph and his work, and if you are working, if you're a professional, that's really for you. Next week's gonna talk about integrity. He's gonna talk about his kanabitong his attitude towards work, and Joseph and his choices. That's talking about temptation. And all of us go through temptation in life. It's really a test of our character, a test of our walk with the Lord. Joseph and his nation, he's going to become a leader here. He's going to talk about his leadership. Joseph and his heart, that's going to be one of the most emotional part of the series, where he's going to talk about, we're going to talk about bitterness and forgiveness. And Joseph and his legacy, how he would be remembered. And so today we're gonna really look into his family. Our family shape us more than any factor in life. If I wanna date someone, or if I'm still single, if I wanna get to know that person, it's really just not spending time with that person. It's really getting to know the family. That's why that's very important in courtship. That's very important as we get to know each other. And maybe you have been a parent, the way you understand your kids, because most of the time, if you're a parent and you have kids, and you will agree with this 100%, you're able to look into your kids and say, "Ako man na, that's my attitude, that's my personality," And probably if you're still single, and if you went to a family reunion, and you've been to family reunions, maybe both sides, and you realize, hala, that's me, that's my personality, that's my attitude. And exactly, and families could really affect the way we, it's the most influential factor in our lives. And for us to understand Joseph, we have to understand his family, For you, for me, for you to understand me, you have to understand my family. So this is my beautiful wife. She's a dentist. Our daughter, she's 11 years old. She's now in grade 6. Matt is 2 years old, and baby MJ, Miles Judah, he is like 3 months old. Now, I honestly, I could really see the different personalities of my kids. And oftentimes, magtinanaway lang ni Mrs. Makain ko, imo man na, right? Oftentimes, imo man na batasan. And oftentimes, when we get angry with our kids, we kind of say, asa pa ka niliwat? And then you realize for a moment, ay, di ka maday ka nako, or that's my attitude, And most of the time, ang dili nato ganahan sa itong mga kids is really our attitude, a reflection of who we are. And if you want to understand, or if you want to get to know me better, you have to understand my parents. This is my mom and dad, Pastor Lemuel Segovia, and my mom, Mommy Esther, And if you have been with me with the Raise Up a Child, you understand the story behind that. So, mo nang importante good that we get to know Joseph. And 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 I'll tell you right in front is that Joseph's family was a complex web of relationships. So for us to understand Joseph, we must go back one generation. Who among you here remembers kinsayahang papa? Si Jacob, right? And here's what happened to Jacob. And you all understand na si Jacob, ang pangalan niya is deceiver or heel grabber. Okay? Now, interestingly, Jacob fell in love with Rachel. Unfortunately, after 7 years of working, ang gideceive siya sa iyahang father-in-law na si Laban. During the wedding night, nahumana ang kasal, na-realize niya na he married the elder sister. Okay? So for 7 years, nagtrabaho siya and gingnan siya ni Laban, if you want Rachel, which is mo ang love of his life, you have to work for another 7 years. Now, so wala siya choice kay duha ang iyahang wife. Imagine mo ang iya pag mga wives, sisters pagid sila. And during the time, of course, that was allowed by God for certain reasons. Now let's look into the family tree. Si Leah, grabe kayo siya. At first, nanganak siya kay Ruben, kay Simeon, Levi, then Judah. And then, si Rachel, nasuya. Dili man siya kapanganak because, remember, at that time, when you are barren, that's a sign of you're not blessed. There's something wrong with you. So if productive ka nga babae, you were really considered blessed. Now, Rachel, sarado pa sa ang iyang womb. Ang gibuhat ni Rachel, look at this very abnormal thing. Iyang gipresent si Bilhah, iyang slave, and said, Jacob, just sleep with her, and so that we will have child. So that's what happened. Nana si Dan, nana si Naphtali. Tapos, nasuya si Leah. Iya, kay nag-stop na po siya panganak, iya na po gipresent ang iyang slave na si Selpa. That's why nana po duha, si Gadog, si Asher. And then finally, ang womb ni Rachel ni open. Okay? Napaday si Leah sa 9 and 10. Nakapanganak na po siya Issachar and then Zebulun. And then finally, duha ra gid ang anak ni Rachel, that is Joseph and Benjamin. Now, if to summarize the complexity of the family tree of Joseph, Joseph's family was a complex web of relationship. He had Joseph's father, Jacob, had 2 wives, 2 concubines, 12 sons, and 1 daughter. Can you just imagine that, no? I don't know about you, but that's really something for us. So Joseph's generational heritage and immediate family were highly dysfunctional. So it means it's abnormal, it's impaired, okay, in functioning. So for example, a relationship is not working the way it was intended to become. So instead now healthy siya na family, it's very complicated and it's very dysfunctional, no? Now much of Jacob's life was characterized by deception. So he's as a father, as a young man, he really tried to deceive. Even katong pagkabata pa niya, he got the birthright. Remember that? It's what's already a generational pattern, no? He deceived all of his life. He even deceived his father-in-law. So much of Jacob's life was characterized by deception. Now, Joseph's brothers were consumed with revenge. And if you read the Bible, in fact, ang katong nahitabo sa Yaha, when their sister Dinah na rape, what did they do? They massacre. No, naggrabe ang ilang massacre. That's found in Genesis chapter 34. They were really like consumed with revenge. Gi-rape ra unta siya, pero grabe sad ang ilang pag-revenge. Sobra pa sad sa justice. And number 3, Joseph's father and grandfather faced conflict with avoidance and passivity. So when Jacob learned about the massacre, he just didn't do anything. He tolerated it. And all of his life, so he chose the path of least resistance. Isa ganang conflict, so mo na nahitabo. Now let's look into the story. So Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. We're going to introduce Joseph now. Joseph, a young man of 17. So he was in his teen years, was tending the flocks with his brothers. So he was a shepherd boy. That's a very common livelihood back then. The sons of Bilhah and the sons of Silpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. There's one thing about Joseph. Syempre, he was the favorite. Siya ang permi musulti sa kabuang sa mga igsuon. Do you have a brother who's like that or a sister? Nga mo ay kusog kayo magsumbong-sumbong, ma, pa, si kuya, si ate, and let's just face it, we just hate someone who does that, di ba? Bisag sa room, sa class, kung wala ka igsuon, sa classroom ka na bitong pag-abot sa teacher mo yung manumbong, ma'am, si ana. So Joseph was like that. Now, ingon siya diha. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So right there and there, straight to the point, he was the favorite, okay? Because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made a richly ornamented robe for him. That was the robe of many colors. Grabe, no? Obvious na kayo kadad. Murag si Jacob, obvious na kayo siya. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Wow. So right there and there, Jacob blatantly expressed his favoritism by making Joseph a richly ornamented robe. And I hope in our homes as parents or in future parents, in some of our cases, that this will not be the case, that there should be we should not place some favorites. No, so we could really see, karon, a lot of the hate, a lot of the anger, it's because of that. Because the jealousy, the envy, it's because of that, because of the favoritism. So here's what's gonna happen. And then here it's another thing that would cause them to hate even more in Genesis chapter 37, verse 5 to 11. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. I felt he was kind of arrogant and he was kind of medyo ano siya dire, no? Yun siya, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. And in verse 8, in the next verses, he says, his brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And then they hated him all the more. Again, that phrase, hated him all the more because of his dream and what he has said. Then he had another dream, same context. And he told his brothers, listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his fathers as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So, to worst case scenario yung nahitabo, he was already favored, he was the favorite, and Joseph's brothers were filled with hate and jealousy because of his dream. So arrogant, you know. And I think this is a very important thing for us to understand. If God gave you a dream, I think sometimes it's good for us to shut up for a while, right? It's not good for us to publicize that dream. We have to kind of put ourselves in a very reflection. Is this really coming from God? Or if this is really coming from God, is this really something that I should publicize? Because sometimes, even in our sincere hearts, when we publicize such big dreams, we might sound arrogant to some people, no? Okay, now, so here's the plot. What are gonna do, because of the hate, here's what they're gonna do as their brothers. But they saw him in the distance, so they were tending sheep. And before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer. Now, mawita na ang tawag sa passage is Joseph the dreamer. They said to each other, come now, Let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. So they were plotting to really murder him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. Grabe, no? But look at this. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life. Okay? He said, let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. Now, I want you to note that because that's very important. Why was the cistern empty? It was God. Because if it was not empty, he could have drowned to death. Even in this time where he was thrown into the cistern, God was still in control of his life. That's very important. That phrase in the Bible, the cistern was empty, it was really us telling God was still there, no? Regardless of what happened. In verse 25, as they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "Wait, will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" Judah, first he said, let's not kill him, but just throw him. Now Judah said, why don't we just, give him to be a slave? So that's what they did. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianites merchants came by, his brothers pulled up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. Wow. Now Joseph's brothers demonstrated their hatred by betrayal. Their own flesh and blood. They really betrayed that poor 17-year-old, no? Luoy kaayo, teenage boy. Now, Joseph's brothers plotted how to kill him. Reuben and Judah intervened to save Joseph's life. His brothers sold Joseph to Midianite merchants heading to Egypt. Now, in all of this, here's what we're going to understand. Even though that happened to him, he was betrayed. Later on, we'll understand that, wow, God was still there. He was still working the dream. But right now, he's just developing the dreamer in all of this. So he says, let's go back in Genesis chapter 37. So what they did in the brothers, and they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornate robe back to their father and said, they don't have to say anything. Look at what they said. We found this, examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. They don't have to come up with a story. With what they gave, the robe, which was filled with blood or dipped in blood, that was already a picture perfect for the father to really see. And there's something wrong. So we found this, examine it to see whether it is your son's robe. He recognized it and said, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animals has devoured him. Remember, the brothers did not say this. This was not the narrative. This was coming from Jacob. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. So siya na lang nag-conclude. So here's what happened to him. Then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. Wow. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So here we see the merchants sold Joseph to Potiphar. Jacob's sin of deception was perpetuated by his sons. Look at this. What Jacob did in the past, it really came back and hunt him. Now, ang mga guilty, ang iyang mga anak. The brothers deceived their father with Joseph's blood-soaked robe. Jacob mourned and refused to be comforted. Now, if you think about this, if we're just gonna follow history, if you were Joseph, alam mo yung gulong ng palad? You understand the concept of gulong ng palad? If the tables turn, probably if you have all the hate, the anger and resentment, with your 11 brothers, why did they allow this? You could probably, if the tables turn, you could have probably did even much worse, no? So let's go ahead, no? Let's go and skip all of those things, and let's go to Genesis chapter 50 when the tables turn. What's gonna be the choices of Joseph? Will he follow the sin of the family that has been there generationally? Will he follow the dysfunctionality of the parents and even what the brothers did? No. So let's look into that. Murag mo fast forward to sa Genesis chapter 50. So when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, okay, you know what happened to Joseph? He became the governor of Egypt. And then, to make the long story short, nakabalo na yung brothers, ipapuyo sila dito, including iyahang papa. Now, the thing is, his father was dead already. So they said, hadlok sila, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pay us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. Look at this. Naghimuhimo sila. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed, okay, in treating you so badly, okay. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. Actually, they were really asking for mercy here. It says, but Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? I love this. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then, don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Wow. Instead of him trying to get back and do the revenge and all of those things, he chose the path of righteousness. He chose the godly path. And it was such a blessing, no, to see this. This was really grace unfolding in Joseph and to his brothers. So by trusting God, this was really the thing. He trusted God. By trusting God, Joseph refused to be defined by the dysfunction of his family. Here's the problem with a lot of people today. They do life as if they're the victim of their dysfunction family. Permi lang nila ginahimong excuse with their bad behavior, with their vices, with their wrong choices. I'm like this because my family is like that. I'm like this because this is what my dad did to me, my brothers or my sisters did to me. But actually, that should not define you. That's not supposed to be the case, especially if you are a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. You are no longer a victim by the dysfunction of your family. You're no longer defined by that. So what did he do? Joseph rejected deception and chose integrity. That's very important because next Saturday we're gonna really unpack that, how his integrity was really in all of these things that happened to him was fully, makita yun nato ba. Number 2, Joseph rejected revenge and chose forgiveness. That's very important. Instead of him, if I was Joseph, probably baka hunahuna yun kung unsta man niya. Pag mubalhin yun when the tides turn, when the tables turn, but instead of revenge, he forgave. That's very powerful. I think we should learn more of that. And it says here, Joseph rejected passivity and chose initiative. You know, instead of tolerating the things that are wrong and all of that, he really took initiative. Number 4, Joseph rejected favoritism and chose impartiality. He could have just said, Reuben, because you spare my life. You know, Benjamin, because you are my brother in the mom. Kamu lang akong i-bless. Kamu lang makapuyo diri. Instead of doing that, that's favoritism. But he was impartial. He was good to all of his brothers, regardless. No? Number 5, Joseph rejected jealousy and chose contentment. Sabi niya, God, what you've intended evil, but God intended it for good, for the salvation of many. Number 6, Joseph rejected betrayal and chose loyalty. And we're gonna see even in his life in Egypt, we will see that loyalty unfold next week. Now, here's the thing, folks, and this is really the application now. And maybe you could relate to all of this. Every home is broken as a result of the fall and the curse. In fact, in the Philippines, it's really more than 60% of our families are dysfunctional. Okay? So it's because of sin and the fall and the effects of it. No? But here's the thing. This cycle of dysfunction is not inevitable. Okay? It can be broken by the choices we make in response to God's grace. The good thing about this, listen to me, regardless of what your family did to you, the pain, the hurt, you can choose to forgive, you can choose to be healed, and you could choose the path to freedom, to wellness, to healing, the path of Christ, and the path of blessing. No? It can be broken by the choices. And I believe that's what Joseph did. He made the right choices along the way. Even though he had all the reasons. He had all the reasons to choose revenge, to choose, all of favoritism and all of that. But you see, he was not defined or victimized by his own family and the dysfunction of it. No. So how has the dysfunction in the home you grew up negatively impacted you? And this is our self-reflection. It's in your outline, and this is something that you could reflect during the week. Have you or will you forgive your parents and siblings? As parent, I realize, now I'm a parent, even though with all of our best intentions and sincere motives, we will still gonna hurt our kids. Maybe it be deliberately or undeliberately or indeliberately, So we have to forgive them. We have to forgive our parents if they have done some things in our lives, we still are haunted by it. Another thing is that in what one specific area do you most want to break your generational pattern and establish a new legacy? Actually, this is gonna be what we're gonna be discussing this afternoon later sa breakout session. Number 4, in what ways do you see your personal, wrong spelling, character flaws manifested in your children? That's only for if you're a parent. And then, when and how will you humbly ask your children's forgiveness if you're a parent and help them learn from your mistakes? Okay? So I want us to go to our discussion groups, and I want us to discuss this. This is very important. If you went through our break free, this is more deeper than that, as we have understand. In what one specific area do you most want to break your generational pattern and establish a new legacy? Okay, so Phil,